In the summer of 1874, a quiet Tennessee hollow thought its secrets were safe forever. But when they lowered the last bucket from an old abandoned well, the water ran red with memory. Bones rose. A name was carved in stone. And the earth, patient as judgment itself, decided the time for silence had ended. The earth does not forget. It is older than any law, older than any war, older than the very idea of mercy. It keeps what we bury, not out of kindness, but because it knows that every sin, every scream, every drop of innocent blood eventually demands its day in the sun. And sometimes the earth uses the strangest vessels to deliver its verdict. A well is no ordinary grave. It is a throat. A mouth open to the underworld. For decades it drinks the rain of heaven and gives back life to the fields. But when the water is finally stolen away, when the last black drop is pumped into the dust, the well stops giving, and begins to confess. This is the story of Cers Creek, Tennessee, July 1874. And what the well finally spat out would force every man, woman, and child in that hollow to stare at the face of their own hidden guilt. The air that summer was not merely hot, it was biblical. A thick, wet, living thing that wrapped itself around your throat like a noose made of wool. It pressed down on the ridges east and west of the settlement until the whole valley felt like the inside of a closed fist. 9 years after Appomattox, the cannons were gone, but the silence they left behind was louder than any artillery. The war had ended on paper. In Cers Creek it had simply sunk underground, like poison in a vein. 340 souls. That was all. A number that had not changed since before the first shots at Fort Sumter. People did not arrive here, they were born here, they suffered here, they died here, and they were buried in the same red clay that now guarded secrets no living tongue would speak. The town had perfected the art of forgetting. They had practiced it the way other towns practiced hymns, quietly, collectively, every Sunday. The single dusty street baked under a merciless sun. The general store's porch boards groaned like old men. Inside, the proprietor, a hollow-cheeked man named Elias Crow, moved slowly, as though even lifting a sack of meal might disturb something better left alone. The whitewashed Baptist church leaned slightly westward, its steeple crooked from a storm in '68 that everyone secretly believed was God's warning. The livery stable smelled of sour hay and resignation. And at the far end, the little stone jail sat like a toothless watchdog rarely needed, because in Cers Creek justice was usually delivered by cold shoulders and closed doors rather than iron bars. The creek itself, the one that gave the town its name, had become a pathetic trickle. Its banks had cracked open like parched lips. Cattle stood motionless in the shade of ancient oaks, eyes half-closed, tails flicking at flies that never tired. Even the cicadas seemed to sing slower, as if the heat had thickened their blood too. Into this stifling stillness walked Harlan Pute every morning. Constable Harlan Pute. 45 years old, lean as a fence rail, eyes the color of storm clouds. A Union veteran who had marched through the slaughter at Chickamauga and come home carrying ghosts he never named. 6 years wearing the Tin Star, and the worst crime he had ever investigated was a stolen mule. He preferred it that way. Some men chase evil. Harlan had seen enough of it in the war to know that evil was happiest when left undisturbed. But evil, like water, finds its own level. The old Harrove place sat on the eastern edge of town like a wound that had never healed. The house had collapsed years ago into a heap of gray timbers. The fields were a jungle of briars and blackberry vines. And in the center of it all, like a dark pupil staring up at heaven, stood the well. Children dared each other to peer over its rotten wooden cover. They dropped stones and counted the seconds until the splash. The old people crossed themselves, or at least made the motion, and hurried past with eyes averted. Because everyone in Cers Creek knew, in the way you know things you are never told, that something unholy had happened at that well once. No one had to. The silence itself was the story. Finally, after years of half-hearted complaints and one near miss with a neighbor's child, the town council voted. Drain it. Fill it. Seal the mouth of the past forever. The job fell to Thomas Grundy. Thomas was 32, built like someone who had been wrestling the earth since he could walk. Broad shoulders, calloused hands, a face permanently dusted with the same red clay he dug through for a living. He did not believe in ghosts. He believed in hard work, cold water, and getting paid. He brought his hand pump, a coil of hemp rope thick as a man's wrist, and his 15-year-old helper, Percy, a nervous, wide-eyed boy whose imagination had already begun running ahead of him like a spooked horse. They started on a Monday that felt like the inside of a furnace. The pump groaned. Brown water gushed out in rusty ropes, staining the dry earth the color of old blood. Percy wrinkled his nose. "Smells wrong, Mr. Grundy. Like something died down there a long time ago and forgot to leave." Thomas only grunted and kept cranking. By Tuesday night the water was gone. By Wednesday dawn the well stood open, a black, vertical throat breathing cold air into the July heat. The smell that rose now was unmistakable: damp stone, mineral, and something else. Something that made the hair on Thomas's arms rise before his mind could name it. He rigged the rope and pulley to a nearby oak, tested the knots twice, lit his tin lantern, and began the descent. The world above shrank to a distant coin of blinding light. The rope creaked. His boots scraped against slick moss-covered stones. The air grew colder with every foot he dropped, as though he were lowering himself not into the ground but into the grave of time itself. The lantern's flame danced like a frightened soul. And the smell, God help him, the smell grew heavier. It was not rot exactly. It was older. Patient. The smell of something that had waited 40 years for an audience. His boots touched bottom. Not mud. Not bedrock. Flat field stones. Carefully laid. Deliberately sealed. Thomas's heart, steady all his life, gave one hard, warning thump. He swept the lantern beam across the floor. In the far corner, near the curved wall, the stones had been disturbed just enough. A hairline crack. A shadow where no shadow should be. He knelt. His thick fingers worked into the crevice and closed around something smooth, curved, unmistakably human. He drew it into the lantern light. A femur. Adult. Human. Then another bone. And another. A child's rib cage, tiny, delicate, heartbreaking. Fragments scattered across the stones like broken commandments. This was no accident. This was a grave. A deliberate, blasphemous grave dug at the bottom of a well so the water could wash away the evidence for decades. Thomas's mouth went dry. Then his lantern caught something else. Tucked into a narrow gap between two large stones, almost hidden, sat a small tin box no bigger than a man's palm. Its lid sealed with thick, ancient wax and a bent nail driven through like a spike. And just above it, carved deep into the field stone itself, two words. He had to bring the lantern so close the flame nearly touched the rock. Silas Thorne. The name hit him like a fist to the sternum. He did not know the name. No one in Cers Creek had ever spoken it in his hearing. But the moment he read it, carved there in the dark where no eyes were meant to see, Thomas Grundy understood something ancient and terrible. The well had not merely hidden bodies. It had hidden a judgment. He gathered the bones, the tin box, and a scrap of paper on which he copied the carved name. Then he looked up at the tiny circle of sky far above and called for the rope. His voice did not shake. But something inside him had already begun to. Percy, waiting above, heard the call, saw the bundle, glimpsed the white of bone in the lantern light, and ran. He ran as though the hounds of hell were behind him. Straight through town, past staring faces, straight to the jailhouse door. Harlan Pute was at his desk when the boy exploded inside, pale as milk, gasping. "Constable. Mr. Grundy, down the well, bones, human bones, and a name. A name carved in the stone." Harlan rose slowly. The war had taught him many things. One of them was that some silences, once broken, can never be mended. He put on his hat, told Percy to stay put, and walked out into the heat. Every porch, every window, every shadow watched him pass. They already knew. The constable reached the well site just as the sun began its slow, merciless climb toward noon. Thomas Grundy sat on the stone lip, pipe smoke curling around his head like a halo made of ash. At his feet lay the small, terrible bundle wrapped in his apron. Harlan knelt beside him without a word. Thomas did not speak at first. He simply reached down, unfolded the cloth, and let the bones catch the light. Then he handed Harlan the scrap of paper. 2 words. Silas Thorne. In the distance, a single cicada stopped singing, as though even the insects understood that something sacred and irreversible had just begun. The well had spoken. And Cers Creek was about to learn that some secrets, once dragged into the light, refused to be buried again. The bones lay on the apron like accusations no one had the courage to speak aloud. Small. Fragile. Human. Harlan Pute did not flinch. He had buried boys younger than these in shallow Virginia trenches, watched their faces turn gray under artillery smoke. But this was not battlefield death, clean, loud, final. This was slow murder dressed in silence. A child's jawbone, no bigger than his palm, stared back at him with the patience of the damned. A piece of skull curved like a question mark that had waited 4 decades for an answer. Thomas Grundy sat motionless on the well lip, pipe clenched between his teeth. The smoke rose thin and gray, as though trying to escape the weight of what lay below. Harlan lifted the tin box next. Rust had eaten half its surface, but the wax seal, cracked, blackened, still clung stubbornly. A single bent nail pinned the lid like a final nail in a coffin. He worked the nail free with the tip of his knife. Wax crumbled like old communion bread. The lid came up with a soft sigh of released air that had been trapped since before the war, air that still carried the faint, sweet rot of damp paper and old secrets. 3 documents. Brittle. Water-stained at the edges. But the center's miracle of miracles remained legible. Harlan did not read them aloud. Some truths are too heavy to speak in daylight. He scanned each page once, twice, committing the shapes of the words to memory the way a soldier memorizes a map before walking into ambush. Then he folded them with care and slipped them inside his coat, next to the heartbeat that had suddenly grown loud in his ears. He looked at Thomas. "You said the name was carved above where the box was hidden?" Thomas nodded once. Deep. Deliberate. Like whoever put it there wanted it found, eventually. Harlan's gaze drifted to the scrap of paper bearing the copied letters. Silas Thorne. The name felt like a cold key turning in a lock he had not known existed. He had never heard it spoken in Cers Creek. Not in church, not in the general store, not around winter fires. Yet here it was etched at the bottom of a sealed grave, beside the bones of innocence. Names carved in stone do not lie. They wait. "Stay here," Harlan told Thomas. "No one near this well. Not children. Not curious men. No one." Thomas exhaled smoke. Wasn't planning on leaving. Harlan sent for Deputy Clem Wofford first. The boy arrived on a lathered horse, 26, and still wearing the eager shine of someone who thought law work meant breaking up Saturday night fights. One look at the open apron, one glimpse of white bone against dark canvas, and the shine vanished. Clem staggered 3 steps, bent at the waist, and emptied his stomach into the parched weeds. Harlan waited without comment. Some lessons cannot be taught, they must be witnessed. Aldous Pute, the town clerk, arrived wheezing, ledger clutched to his chest like a breastplate. 63 years old, round as a barrel, spectacles perpetually sliding. He avoided the bones entirely, eyes darting to the sky, to the ridge, anywhere but the truth at their feet. But when his gaze flicked, just once, to the paper with the name Silas Thorne, something crossed his face. Not terror. Recognition. A shadow that vanished as quickly as it came. Harlan noted it. He noted everything. As dusk bled purple across the western ridge, Harlan walked north through town. Porches emptied as he passed. Doors closed softly. Curtains twitched like nervous eyelids. The town was already whispering. By morning the whisper would be a roar. He was not going home. He was going to Agnes Durr. Agnes lived in a small clapboard house kissed by the creek's edge. 78 years old, thin as winter kindling, but her eyes clear, cornflower blue, still held the sharpness of a woman who had outlived every lie the town ever told itself. She had buried a husband, raised 3 sons who moved west, and kept the memories everyone else had tried to drown. Harlan knocked once. The door opened before the echo died. Agnes stood there, silver hair in a neat bun, apron dusted with flour. 2 cups of coffee already steamed on the parlor table beneath a lace cloth. She had known he was coming. "Constable," she said, voice soft but steady. "Sit." That would never return. The town invented an explanation. Debts. Shame. A midnight flight to escape creditors. Reverend Obadiah Fitch preached it from the pulpit, tall, booming, eyes like polished flint. "The Lord moves in mysterious ways," he intoned. "Sometimes he calls his children to new fields." Within months Fitch filed papers claiming the Hargrove land, house, fields, had been legally transferred to him. Within a year he sold it to the Vances at a handsome profit. The Vance family would grow rich and respected on that stolen ground. Agnes's husband Luther had never believed the story. Quiet man. Honest to a fault. He asked Fitch once, plain, why would a man in debt leave his tools? His children's shoes? Fitch stared him down. "Mind your business, Luther. God works in ways you cannot fathom." Years later, drunk and dying, Luther muttered in his sleep. Agnes heard the name. Silas Thorne built that well, and Silas Thorne knew what went into it. She had never spoken it aloud until tonight. Harlan felt the documents in his pocket grow heavier. A forged deed. A letter Edmund never mailed, proof of Fitch's land schemes, warning of consequences. A partial confession scrawled in terror. And now the name from Luther's dying lips, carved where the bones had lain. The preacher had not merely stolen land. He had silenced a family that threatened to expose him. Agnes looked at Harlan across the lamplight. "They didn't run, Constable. They were taken. All of them." And the well drank their silence. Outside, the cricket stopped. As though even the night understood that judgment was no longer sleeping. Harlan stood. "Thank you, Agnes." She touched his sleeve as he reached the door. "Be careful, Harlan. Some truths don't just unravel. They tear." He stepped into the dark. The ridge loomed black against stars. Somewhere in the distance a dog howled once, long, mournful, then fell silent. Back in the jailhouse, Harlan spread the documents under the lamp. Clem snored in the back room, oblivious. Harlan read again. The forged signature, trembling, wrong. Edmund's real hand in the church register, sure, flowing. The letter to the Knoxville lawyer, dated 2 weeks before the disappearance. Discrepancies in land records. Warnings from Fitch. Copies of proof enclosed. A plea, hold these until you hear from me. Harlan closed his eyes. He saw it clearly now. Edmund Hargrove had discovered a quiet empire of theft. Fitch, the man of God, had preyed on the vulnerable, the indebted, the sick, the lonely, forging papers, claiming land, profiting from disappearance. When Edmund confronted him, when he gathered evidence, Fitch had not debated. He had acted. And Silas Thorne, whoever he was, had helped. Had dug. Had sealed. Had carved his own name as signature, or confession. Harlan folded the papers. He looked toward the window, toward the eastern ridge where the old well waited like an open mouth. The town had built its peace on bones. Now the bones were rising. And Harlan Pute, a man who had once believed some things were better left buried, knew he would have to dig until every lie saw daylight. The lamplight in the jailhouse office burned low that night, throwing long shadows across the desk like fingers reaching from the grave. Harlan Pute sat motionless, the 3 documents spread before him like the open pages of a forbidden Bible. The first 2, the forged deed and Edmund's unsent letter, were damning enough. But the third was a wound. It was written in a hand that shook so violently the ink had pooled in dark, accusing blots. No date. No full signature. Only the initials at the bottom, OF. Obadiah Fitch. Harlan read it slowly, forcing himself to absorb every tortured word. What was done cannot be undone by this accounting. But I find that I cannot carry it longer without setting it to paper, if only to have it witnessed by God, if not by men. The pretense, a nighttime meeting at the Hargrove property to resolve the matter. Silas Thorne St. in the confession had given his word. No harm. Safe passage west. Enough coin to start anew. Fitch had believed him. Or convinced himself he did. I heard what I heard. When it was over, St. told me the matter was concluded and that the well would be sealed the following morning. He said the water would cover everything and in 10 years no one would remember the name Hargrove. He said the children would be with God. The words ended there. The bottom of the page dissolved into a watercolor stain of ink in time, tears, perhaps, or well water seeping in like divine judgment withheld. Harlan sat in the quiet for a long time. The cicadas outside had gone silent, as though the night itself refused to breathe. This was not mere complicity. This was betrayal dressed in clerical robes. A shepherd who had led his flock to slaughter, then prayed over the empty pews. And Silas Thorne, the man whose name was carved like a signature at the bottom of the grave, had been the blade. Harlan wrote one letter before dawn, to the county courthouse in Knoxville, requesting any record of Silas Thorne, Easter, Tennessee, 1830 to 1835. He needed a face. A history. Proof that the monster had walked in daylight. The next morning the heat returned like vengeance. Harlan moved through it with the steady purpose of a man who has seen too much to turn back. He went first to Mayor Elias Vance. The mayor's office occupied the grandest brick building on the street, 2 stories of red solidity rising above the sagging timber like a monument to ambition. Elias Vance, early 50s, always dressed as though attending Sunday service even on Tuesday. Linen suit crisp. Cravat knotted with precision. A man who wore his lineage like armor. Harlan told him only the minimum. Human remains in the old Hargrove well. An investigation underway. Vance performed concern flawlessly. Eyebrows lifted in measured surprise. My word, Constable. How dreadful. A terrible accident, no doubt. Some drifter, perhaps, fallen in years ago. Smooth. Modulated. Empty. But when Harlan mentioned the tin box documents inside, something shifted. Behind the mayor's eyes, a stillness descended. Not fear. Calculation. The cold appraisal of a man weighing how far the threat had advanced. Harlan saw it. He had seen that look on battlefields, the moment a soldier realizes the line has broken and retreat is no longer possible. Vance recovered quickly. Of course the town will cooperate fully. But discretion, Constable. No need to alarm good people with speculation when facts remain murky. The warning was velvet-wrapped steel: dig, but not too deep. Do not disturb the delicate fiction that has kept this town standing for 40 years. Harlan nodded once. Left without another word. Outside, the sun hammered the dust into shimmering waves. But the true heat came from inside, the slow burn of certainty. Vance had not been surprised because the Vances had always known. Cornelius Vance, the founding patriarch, had bought the Hargrove land cheap and fast right after the family vanished. He had built wealth on that ground. Elias had inherited the legacy. And when the council voted to drain the well, Elias had pushed hardest for a quick fill-in. No excavation. No questions. He had never expected Thomas Grundy to go to the bottom. Harlan walked straight to Agnes Durr's porch. She was shelling peas, hands moving in the slow rhythm of someone who has outlived storms. She looked up as he approached, eyes already asking the question. The Vances, Harlan said. When did the original family arrive? Agnes paused, a pea pod suspended between gnarled fingers. Old Cornelius came in 1831. Before the Hargroves disappeared, but not long before. Bought land quick. Had capital no one could quite explain. She met his gaze. And he came around the same time as Silas Thorne. Harlan felt the world tilt half a degree. They knew each other? Agnes nodded. From Virginia, people said. Thorn was here only a few years, buying, selling, always watching like a hawk. Then he was gone. Cornelius stayed. Built everything you see. The mosaic locked into place with brutal clarity. Silas Thorn, the fixer. The man who made problems vanish. Cornelius Vance, the beneficiary. The man who turned blood-soaked land into brick and legacy. Elias Vance was not protecting the town. He was protecting 40 years of stolen peace. Harlan returned to the jailhouse. 10 days later the first reply arrived from Knoxville, thick envelope, official seal. Silas Thorn had existed. Land speculator. Deed broker. 1828 to 1836. Properties turned over fast. Often from distressed owners. Often from families that disappeared. After 1836, nothing. No death. No sale. No trace. 2 days later, a second letter. From Bartholomew Finch, retired court recorder. He remembered Thorn. Whispers of fraud. Quiet sheriff inquiries. Families who stopped complaining permanently. A third letter came unsolicited. Dorothea Taft, Bristol, Virginia. 71. Thorn's distant cousin. She described a charming, conscienceless man. A overheard conversation, loose ends in Tennessee, the Hargrove place. She believed he had not died. He had shed his name like old skin and started again somewhere else. She closed with a plea. If you find anything conclusive, Constable. I would like to know the truth before I meet my maker. Harlan read the letters twice. Then he called Clem in. The deputy listened, face draining of color. This Thorn, he was a monster. A man who chose to be one, Harlan corrected. And he had help. From a preacher. From the man who founded half this town. Meanwhile, under Harlan's orders, Thomas Grundy had continued the work. Stone by stone, he lifted the false floor of the well. More bones emerged. Day after day. 5 sets matching the Hargroves, Edmund, Clara, Nell, Ruth, Davy. Small ribs. Tiny phalanges. Heartbreaking fragility. Then the 6th. Larger. Male. Thick bones. Healed fractures on both forearms, marks of a life spent breaking things or being broken. The back of the skull, one clean, crushing blow from behind. Cause of death unmistakable. This was no victim. This was the executioner. Thomas kept digging. In a clay-lined crevice beneath the stones, shielded by a rusted outer tin, he found a leather satchel. Inside, oilcloth wrapping. 6 more land deeds, the very forgeries Edmund had uncovered. And a gold locket, tarnished but intact. Harlan pried it open with care. The tiny portraits had dissolved to dust. But on the back, faint and elegant. E to Ch. 1828. Edmund to Clara. Their wedding year. Harlan held the locket in his palm. The metal was cold despite the July furnace outside. It carried the faint warmth of a promise once made in love, now unearthed like a cry from the earth itself. The well had not merely hidden bodies. It had preserved evidence. A confession. A locket. A 6th skeleton, the killer betrayed by his own. Divine justice, Harlan thought, does not always strike with thunder. Sometimes it simply waits. Patient. Silent. Until the water recedes and the stones are lifted. And when the last secret rises, no prayer can bury it again. The locket rested in Harlan Pute's palm like a small, tarnished heart. E to Ch. 1828. Edmund to Clara. A promise etched in gold, now pulled from mud and bone. He turned it slowly, thumb tracing the faint curves of the letters as though they might still carry the warmth of the hands that once clasped them. This was no mere artifact. It was breath. It was laughter in the creek. It was a child's tiny fingers reaching for a mother's skirt. It was everything the well had tried to drown for 40 years. Harlan slipped it into his pocket next to the weight of the handcuffs he now carried not as threat, but as duty. He went next for all dispute. No polite knock this time. A sharp, official rap. Then another. Silence answered. The door was locked. The windows dark. Curtains drawn like closed eyelids. The house exhaled emptiness, not absence, but flight. Harlan stepped back. Clem. Break it. The deputy, once trembling at the sight of bone, now moved with grim certainty. One powerful kick splintered wood. The lock gave way like brittle bone. Inside, stripped. Desk bare. Files vanished. 3 days' mail drifted on the floor like fallen leaves. Aldous had not retired. He had run. Someone had warned him. And Harlan knew the shape of that warning's shadow. He walked straight to the mayor's office. The heavy oak door swung open without ceremony. Elias Vance sat behind his polished mahogany desk, papers arranged with deliberate calm. The air smelled of pipe tobacco and dread. Vance looked up, eyes steady, but the skin around them tightened like stretched parchment. Harlan closed the door. The latch clicked like a gavel. He did not sit. All dispute is gone, Mayor. Vance's mouth curved in practiced surprise. Is he? A shame. The heat takes its toll on a man his age. His desk is cleared. Files missing. Mail untouched for days. Harlan's voice stayed level, a blade held flat. He didn't retire. He fled. Someone told him to run. Vance leaned back, fingers steepled. Assumptions, Constable. Dangerous things. The sixth skeleton, Mayor. Harlan stepped forward. Large man. Powerful build. Healed fractures on both forearms. Single crushing blow to the back of the skull. Not a victim. The executioner. We found the satchel beneath him, forged deeds. The locket, E to CH 1828. Fitch's confession, OF. He lured them to the well. Promised safety. Thorne did the rest. And then someone, Fitch himself, ended Thorne the same way. Sealed him with the family he murdered. Vance's composure fractured. The faint politician's smile vanished. Eyes flickered, fear, then fury. You've been busy, Constable. Digging up ghosts. Old history. Truth doesn't age, Mayor. Your father arrived with Thorne. Bought the Hargrove land from Fitch days after they vanished. Built everything on that ground on blood he never spilled himself, but never questioned either. Vance surged to his feet. Fist slammed the desk. The sound cracked like gunfire. My father was a builder. He brought prosperity. He had nothing to do with. He knew. Harlan's voice cut clean. He knew Thorne's work. Knew Fitch's fraud. Knew the Hargroves didn't run. He chose silence. Chose profit. Chose legacy over justice. And you, Elias, you watched that well for 40 years. Pushed to fill it quick. Warned Aldous. You're not the killer. You're the keeper. Vance's breath came ragged. He sank back into the chair, shoulders collapsing like a man relieved of a burden too long carried. I never killed anyone, Constable. The words came soft, hollow. I just never stopped it either. I wonder sometimes how different that really is. Harlan looked down at him, not with hatred, but with the weary sorrow of a man who has seen too many versions of the same sin. He drew the cuffs. Cold iron caught the lamplight. Elias Vance. I arrest you for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to conceal a capital crime. Vance extended his wrists without protest. He stared past Harlan, through the window. Toward the eastern ridge where the well once waited. The charges were thin. 40 years. Dead witnesses. A name still heavy with influence. Harlan filed them anyway. Not for prison. For the record. For the light. In the weeks that followed, the truth unraveled in slow, painful threads. Dr. Alastair Finch examined the remains in Knoxville. 5 matched the Hargroves, man, woman, 3 children. The 6th, Thorne. Cause of death, blunt trauma to the occiput. Fitch's confession refrained not mere regret, but retribution. The preacher had killed the monster he helped unleash, then buried him with the innocents. 18 years later, Fitch died of fever, haunted, pale at the sound of wind over water. The county prosecutor reviewed charges against Vance. Dropped time, lack of living principles. But justice is not always iron bars. Vance resigned as mayor within months. Sold the land, the very acres stolen from the Hargroves, and vanished by November. No one asked where. Some legacies end in quiet exile. All dispute was never found. Swallowed by the vast, anonymous post-war South. Thomas Grundy refused commendation. I only did my job. He dug wells another 18 years, hands steady, eyes forever changed. Agnes Durr lived to 84. Died peacefully in 1880. In her Bible, one sheet, careful script. Luther was right. It took the water going away for the truth to come up. I hope he knows. Harlan kept the locket on his desk until he retired in 1881, eyes failing from war and lamplight. He never spoke of the case again. But those who knew him saw the change, a man who carried silence differently now. The well was filled. Concrete poured. A flat stone capped it. At Harlan's quiet suggestion, they carved one line. Here stood the well. Here rests the truth. Years passed. Children read the words and asked. Parents shrugged, something old. Don't worry. But the stone remained. The earth does not forget. It waits. Patient as judgment. Until the water recedes, the stones lift, and the dead speak once more. Some secrets refuse burial. Some towns are built on graves they pretend are fields. And when the bottom is finally laid bare, the silence breaks, not with thunder, but with the small, terrible sound of truth rising into light.